Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast. I'm here with Pranitha Patil, and it is awesome to have her because she is the co-founder and COO of Function Health. And in full disclosure, I am a user originally of Function Health. Then I got lucky enough to be an investor as well in Function Health. And so it's sort of a passion of mine thinking through longevity, just health overall. And I get kind of, I think the sexy term nowadays is health span, and thinking through that and what that really means for myself as I'm getting older and as I'm, of course, trying to optimize my life and what I'm doing. And so having Pranitha here today is wonderful. So Pranitha, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk about all things function and all things business.
Yes, exactly. And obviously, so one of the things, just to kick it off, and we probably will spend a bunch of time talking about function, but to really kick things off, one of the questions I like to ask everybody is, how do you define, right? We call this podcast Entrepreneurial Excellence. What is excellence in your mind? How do you define that? And what does it look like? Especially because most of the people I have on the podcast have founded multiple companies. This is your first company. And you were a consultant before that. And
Yeah.
I probably want to talk about that because people kind of look down on consultants to some extent. It's like, oh, you're a consultant and then they're going to do the sexy, cool thing and become like a founder of a company. And compared to all of us other folks who are just sitting in the trenches, digging away every day, being a startup founder. Walk me through, I want to talk about your journey, but even just start with like, how do you define excellence? Like, what does that really look like to you?
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. A couple tenets I would say when it comes to excellence are one, being open-minded and soaking in everything that you can learn, but also having conviction and it's really sticking to that conviction. So when it comes to excellence, it's really being focused on one thing and doing one thing well, having no limiting beliefs, and being able to go with your gut and just try, fail quickly. And that's something that I've learned time and time again is just try it out. If it doesn't work, we pick back up and start again on something slightly different, and we're able to pivot. So a
And,
couple different definitions there.
and what does that look like then? If you think through like your own life goals in a sense, right? And you're like, hey,
Yeah.
like where does Pranitha want to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And like look back and be like, I excelled as the co-founder of Function. What does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, that would be such an honor, first of all. And that would mean that I just put in a ton of work to put something out in the world that I'm super proud of. I would want to look back and say, this is something I got my hands dirty building, and I'm incredibly proud of the outcome and the mission of what I've done. And that's what I would want to look back and see.
How is that? So I mean, I could argue in first of all, I love that definition. I think that's accurate, but also lots of people try
Of
lots of
course.
startups in large majorities, 9 out of 10 fail,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So would you have the same answer no matter what happens with Function, or does your answer change if you have, let's say, some massive exit of some sort?
No, to have the same exact answer. We're trying our very best to change people's lives and bring people power back into their health. So, regardless of the outcome, I would say the same thing. We're giving it our best shot and we're shaking things up. Like we're doing something differently. And that fundamentally is the motivating factor for myself as well as my co founders. And that's the driver. It's not the exit, it's not the giant, like, whatever picture on the wall. That's what we're driven by. And so regardless of the outcome, it's like we have already made a fundamental shift, even if it's right now small and what we're trying to do is big. So that wouldn't change if we fail in a year or two at all.
I want to ask you more about some of the bumps in the roads that you went through and challenges you guys have had as you're kind of thinking through excellence and like constantly iterating to excellence. However, before we do that, can you just define to everybody what like Function is, right? Most people might have zero idea what Function Health is and what you're trying to build.
Absolutely. So Function Health is a health platform. What we're doing is we're building a personal health co-pilot. You can think about it as a doctor over your shoulder that's guiding you throughout your journey. What we're starting with is 100 lab tests that are helping democratize access for individuals to understand what's going on in their whole body, from your heart to your hormones to your thyroid and beyond. And we are starting with this comprehensive testing because, unlike the traditional physician's office annual visit, which is often incredibly costly and inaccessible and usually reactive, we're doing this with the lab testing at the front as well as actionable insights. So folks know what to actually do with those tests. And all these results and insights are sitting in a health platform. They're meant to be continuously tracked and securely stored so that function is able to be your guide and empower you to take actions in your daily life and allow you to watch your health transformations over time.
And is the idea being in, or is the challenge you're solving, then a problem you're solving is basically that people maybe get a health check once a year if they're being good about it, and then they leave the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Hey, like eat better," and then that's it, and then you're done, and you hope your health check is at least as good the next year, but you're probably instead on a slowly declining path toward worse health because that's what we're used to happening as you're getting older.
Fundamentally, yeah, exactly. So usually it's either, hey, you're kind of out of range, but you know what? This can be fixed and you should be fine. Or make this small lifestyle change and we'll see you in 3 to 5 years. Like you actually don't even have to come back next year because it seems like you're all is fine and healthy. The advice varies for what people have received when they go to a physician's office. So our goal is say, hey, let's actually put information back into your hands so that you know what questions to ask when you do go to that physician's office. You know what to fight for, what to push for. And what I often say is health isn't happening at the doctor's office. It's happening at home. It's happening in your office. It's happening with friends. So how do you empower individuals to take action for those times when that's actually where health is happening and feel like they actually have the information to make the right decision for their own bodies?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I will say, right, as someone who is into this movement and sort of cares about what's happening with my health and just because I'm once again trying to like sort of optimize how I feel every day and I want to feel at my best and my peak.
Yeah.
I love the fact that I mean if the price is $500 a year and you get I think what like two or three different blood tests different times of the year, 100 plus health indicators, including like an age, a bio age tests, right? It's like, did I describe that terribly, but approximately correct?
You're good. You're good. Yeah, that's spot on. We do testing. A membership is testing twice a year. So the first set is 100 biomarkers, and the second set we recommend doing within 3 to 6 months, which is 60 tests. And then individuals have the option of purchasing testing whenever they want throughout the year, whether they're tracking their thyroid every quarter or tracking their heart every month. They can purchase that based on what their goals are and what they're looking to do. So yeah, that is correct. And then we do have a marker called biological age that's meant to be culmination of a couple biomarkers. It's not the whole set. I want to make sure that folks know that it's not the full thing, but it is meant to show you kind of how you're aging as opposed to your chronological age.
How accurate are the biological age tests? Because I've read a bunch about them and like sometimes like it's sort of iffy science right now, but like how accurate are that in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's a formula, and the formula has changed across a couple different studies, but that's why I like to ensure that folks know, hey, if you see a really great biological age, make sure you're looking at your other markers that are out of range because it's not taking into account all of the biomarkers that we test.
Totally. So
Yeah.
I have to ask, are you guys, and I won't ask you many things about the products. I know there's probably lots of things in your roadmap that you don't want to talk about, but I would love it as a user. I would love someday that we'll gamify things a little bit. Like I would love to be able to compare my biomarkers and how I'm doing
Totally.
compared to other people in my age range, things like that, or maybe location, you name it. Is that sort of coming someday? Maybe I don't know if you.
Yeah, that's a potential. It's something that we often talk about. Health is done with friends and community.
Yeah.
And so to be able to compare it with a family member or a friend, we've already anecdotally heard that this is done like at dinner parties.
Oh
People
yeah.
will pull out their function and say, "What's your biological age?"
I know,
at
I've done that
birthday
with my sister,
parties.
my sister-in-law. I've done that with.
Yeah.
I'm getting my wife to do function as well, and I'm going to definitely compare with her.
Yeah.
I will brag on this publicly. I'm 13 and a half years younger biologically than my
Let's
actual
go.
age, so I was proved by that.
Yeah.
But once I'm like, well, how accurate is this actually, and what does this mean? But I like to think I'm headed in the right direction.
Yes, you are, you are. It does get harder as you age to have the delta be bigger. So that is one thing I'll caveat in the formula is it does get to more difficult if you're in your 60s or 70s to have that big of a delta. But yeah,
Gotcha.
generally it's a good marker.
Well, good. So go back to though, like what the sort of the original thing, like excellence, right? And defining excellence on a day-to-day basis and what you do, how you do it at function, and the challenges you kind of hinted at. There are some challenges you've been through. What are some of those challenges? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like as an entrepreneur, you have challenges every single day. So the the biggest thing that I think keeps us running as a team is one, keeping the mission behind everything that we do. But two, it's that what we're doing hasn't ever been done before. And we have to jump through hurdles for our members so that our members don't have to jump through those hurdles. Do you know what I mean? Like the way where what we're doing is making it easier for you to get access to lab testing because we've tried to do it for ourselves. I've been to the physician's office, asked for the tests, met with so much friction. So how can we think about the way we think about it is reframing the narrative of that what we're doing allows all of our members not to have to do this and get information. And so that is one thing that I think keeps us kind of going is this is the why of what we're doing. And when it comes to the challenges, because it hasn't been done before, we've obviously just run into friction points across like, hey, this isn't how the medical system works, just fundamentally. But we've been able to partner with individuals and companies that understand what we're trying to do. We're following the rules because we have to. It's healthcare. It's also people's data. So we take that incredibly seriously. And we've just been pushing the edges of what we can think and imagine in healthcare to get us to a place where, yeah, people just want the information that is going on inside their body. It seems pretty simple, but it's shocking to see how many challenges you might run into along the
Oh,
way.
I'm sure that's every startup, right? Of course,
Yeah.
they all have challenges. What made you want to go from being a successful consultant? So you were at Accenture for 6 years.
Yep.
Why why like why go from great college experiences to Accenture and then say I'm going to go leave that and go into a startup? Like how did that all happen? Like what was the journey and what was pushing you to go do that? Cuz like startups are tough and there are no guarantees and probably like becoming someone pretty senior at Accenture is a
Yeah,
decent guarantee. Like that is you're somewhat guaranteed a steady, relatively safe future if you just stuck with it.
for sure. That was just not me ever. Really appreciate that question. So for me, I did consulting so that I could learn more about the healthcare industry. It's a complex universe in the US. And I spent those 6 years hopping around all the different industries. So worked with health insurance. I worked with hospital systems across the US. So working on like patient experience, working with the C suite of different hospitals. And then I spent some time in India and Africa working on maternal health and community health workers, very different type of healthcare that's delivered internationally. And through those years, I discovered one, if I wanted to support healthcare in the US, I needed to be in the US. And two, I likely needed to start outside of the system just because of how bureaucratic and process heavy healthcare is here and how it's not incentivized to be with the patient at the center. We're getting there slowly, but it's super slow. Like I would be 70 by the time if I wanted function to exist within
Yeah.
the system right away. So for me, I did all of that and always knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to do something outside of the system. And so I actually went to grad school at Harvard for design engineering. It was a very small program, started during COVID. I'll get into my basically how I met Jonathan,
Yeah.
my co-founder story here. But yeah, I went there thinking, okay, let's try to figure out what I would do, maybe start a company, we'll see. Long story short, I met him through one of my classmates and a friend at in the program, and he happened to be there. It was COVID. So we were all in like the most random places. And we happened to be in Boston and we didn't have access to the labs to do any of the physical work with my program. So we were actually doing like physical 3D printing and building in their Airbnb.
Wow.
And while I was doing this, I realized that I was going to be taking a leave of absence, likely from this program. So, yeah, I just talked to Jonathan and said, hey, what's do you know of any ideas when it comes to potentially working at a startup for my leave of absence? Because I was going to,
Why were you going to take a leave of absence? Like what even pushed you to decide that on that?
yeah. So it was a judgment call I had to make of if I want to do this program, I really want to have access to everything that I'm paying for with the program, which means access to the labs, access to chat with my classmates, not just like a couple of them, work with them, work with the professors. There's like so much that was missing. And candidly, I like the caveat there is I've had several classmates finish the program and they loved it post COVID. So I'm sure it would have been great to go through it. But this really sealed the deal for me. Basically, what happened was I chatted with Jonathan, was just debating this leave of absence for a year and then coming back after we thought COVID was going to be done. And then, long story short, he was like, "Hey, I've been working on this idea. I'd love to pair on this with you." And from his perspective, it's a great story. He was just like, "I was watching you all work, and one, I like constantly have a pretty positive get shit done attitude." And so he was observing that. And I was like, "Sure, I don't know you, but like, let's try this out. I love the idea. I'm already tracking my biomarkers on the side for my own health." And long story short, within a month, January of 2021, I was like, "I'm quitting school. We're doing this. Let's go."
Wow.
So I haven't looked back since that moment.
So sort of a good COVID outcome, which I feel like a lot of people didn't have great things come from COVID, but I know it changed the world for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
that's always nice. Congratulations on that front.
Thank you.
And then did you guys do, I mean, like much co-founder dating? Like Jonathan's been someone who's invested in a lot of companies. He's been a founder before. Like it's a big deal to just, I mean, granted, people did a lot of crazy things during COVID, but sort of just jump off like, I'm leaving Harvard and I'm going to go start a company with a guy who just observed me for a while I was doing my work in my lab, in my like Airbnb lab. That's a pretty big jump to be like, wow, we've now
Yeah.
been in it for what, 2.5, 3 years almost now.
Yeah. Yeah. 3 years. We didn't really do much co-founder dating, but I will say the first couple months was essentially that in the back of my mind. Like I could always go back to school. I had just made up my mind that I wanted this product to exist in the world and was shocked that it didn't already. And so for me, it was like clear that we were deeply aligned on many fronts when it came to company building as well as product building and like our mindset of just no limiting beliefs, like this has to exist. Let's just like push through all the walls. And so from a values standpoint, that was like so magnetic that it just worked. And same with Dr. Mark Hyman and same with Mike, our CTO and co-founder. Those relationships, we couldn't be more different, but that's actually been such a powerful thing for us as a co-founding team is we've come from such different backgrounds and we've had just these amazing strengths that come together. And then we've learned how to successfully have conflict and talk it out,
How do you
communicate.
make that work? Are there any heuristics or things you think about, right? If you have all these people, four strong-willed, smart people
Yeah.
with very different backgrounds and experiences and skill sets, how do you make all of them come together and work in the right way? Like as COO, that's probably part of your job. Is like, I need to make sure we're all getting along and actually pushing the ball forward.
Yeah.
What are things that you do to do that?
Consistent feedback in a way that's not like structured. It's like as soon as something's happening, we get on the phone and we resolve it. But even before that, it's just the way of communicating that we've had to work on to get right. It's like any relationship. Take,
For sure.
I can compare it to a marriage, a friendship. It's just about how we communicate to each other, respecting others' opinions, coming at it with like the benefit of the doubt and deep, like we all have pretty deep conviction on our ideas, but we happen to be able to communicate in a way that's like effective, quick, and we're able to come come together on an idea and
Are
make it
there
work.
are those cultural norms that you put in place at the company? Are there things you've done at Function? So Function has about 100 employees right now, or teammates. Like, what are things you put in place at the company? Say, like, these are the things we are following. Cultural norms, how we communicate, what we discuss, why we discuss things. Are those things you put in place that
Yeah.
obviously apply to you as a leadership team, but to the whole company?
Yeah, we very much encourage questions and pushing back because if we just do a top-down approach, we're gonna fail. So and there's folks all across the team that understand what's going on and see things in a different way. So from a like pretty core tenet, it's ask questions, push back, and communicate. Just give the feedback. We're completely remote. We spend some time together, so it's been interesting to see how people communicate on the internet. So calling is highly encouraged versus Slack messaging. It just seems pretty basic, but those kind of things, people feel really comfortable pushing back, and that's honestly been really helpful. Because if they don't, then we're not going to be set up for success.
have you written these down as sort of the rules for like, this is how we function? Like, have you written that down? Like what are the ways you enforce those sort of cultural norms?
Yeah, we have a couple principles written down, but it's more of instead of it being like a manifesto or something, it's just something we build into our everyday meetings. We build into how we come up with a roadmap, execute on a roadmap, talk about hiring at the leadership level, like all of those things. It's just encouraged and discussed. And if someone sees someone else doing it, they feel comfortable doing it, that kind of thing. And I also encourage it again, not just from the leadership level, but from all levels because if it's not happening, among some of our, let's say, member success associates, and I'm not interacting with them every day, but if that's not encouraged at that level, then there's no way it's going to get to the top. It just needs to be happening across the board. So I just highly encourage it across every single time we're doing any sort of planning or problem solving. That's how we implement it at the company.
How do you hire, or what do you do to hire for people with that sort of mindset, or who can handle a culture like that, especially from a remote first perspective?
Yeah, a couple things. First is I say this a lot, and this is slightly different than your question, but the intrinsic motivation is super hard to hire for.
And how do you
It's
define, sorry, how do you define even intrinsic motivation?
motivation being this passion for the mission, but then that fades away if you're not happy at work, obviously. So there's this like it factor that I found all of our team has that I'm able, and so are my co founders, we're able to identify that it factor when we're having conversations with them. And what we do that has worked really well is everyone pretty much comes in as a contract, like trial period. We just get straight into it. And we're like, let's just see, let's date, let's see if we like working together, and then let's make a decision. And that has worked tremendously well when it comes to every single hire we have brought on is contract for a couple months, whatever, trial period, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, and then let's go. And we really just throw them in to the deep end so that they're able to understand what working at function is like. So that's one strategy. And then the biggest thing is just that helps us understand who they are,
Yep.
how motivated they are, how hard they're going to try, if they're going to push back, are they going to ask questions, all those things versus this like really drawn out 7 interview process. We don't do that.
So how many interviews do you normally do for people?
It ranges based on obviously the job, but it's somewhere between, for engineering, it's a little more, but somewhere between like 2 to 5 interviews, depending on the more intense ones are obviously 5, but it's very rare. It'll be just like for my team, it's 2 to 3 max.
And I love the idea. I mean, I have some other folks I've talked with who do sort of these kind of trial periods, but I've
Yeah,
also found them to be really difficult to do properly, right? So if you're courting a big name engineer or something like
sure.
that, and you're like, well, really love to be on the team, but we're going to give you a project to start with first, and you're going to be paid as a contractor for at least 1 to 2 months before we do it. A lot of people are like, well, like I have these other job opportunities over here.
Yeah.
They're going to give me a full-time role. How do you kind of balance that?
I mean, we've been really lucky in that we've been able to convince folks to join this incredible company, and the growth is there and the mission is there. And yeah, I feel super grateful that we've been able to do that. And we have an incredible team, and everybody works so damn hard that it's really motivating to even just do this month trial period because they see how hard everybody is working
Yeah.
and people just get into it.
And is it always, so actually, I mean, I actually am curious about this. Like, is it 1 month on average contract, like you are a contractor versus like, cause I also have people I know that they'll hire you as a full-time person, but they'll be like, look, your first 2 or 3 months here is it's a trial quote unquote period, even
Yeah.
though it's not that different than anything else. Like you're a full-time employee, you're getting paid, you're getting maybe health benefits, or maybe health benefits take like a month or two to kick in, things like that. But they just call it a trial period. So it's easier to let someone go a little bit if they're not hitting those metrics. Or you guys just straight up say, hey, it's going to be contractor for at least 30 days. And
Yeah.
so it's just contractor for 30 days.
It's the contractor and then into full time if it makes sense. Exactly.
And
Yeah.
how are you judging that if someone's getting it done? Like, I mean, I'm sure part of it's like feel, but like, are you doing a weekly check-in with them and you're writing it all down? Be like, hey, like you're slower than everyone else on doing onboarding here. Or
Yeah.
how are you
Yeah.
tracking it?
Exactly. So obviously there's some feel to it, but from like a more metrics based approach, it's check-ins, it's it's not from a competitive way, but it's understanding, hey, are you actually like picking this up as quickly as we need you to? There's a lot of learning and unlearning at any company because things change so quickly.
course.
Are you able to do that? Because in the span of a month, you probably had to learn and unlearn. So just evaluating those like core skills
Mhm.
and the person's reaction to those events that happen. That's that's been our process, and we're able to have pretty honest conversations with folks. Like if they are having questions about something or they have ideas on something, I have a pretty amazing team that's able to correspond and say, "Hey, this is working really well or this isn't, and let's actually shift you to this type of role. Maybe that's better for you." Those kind of things are conversations we're pretty open to having as soon as they join because it benefits both parties to do that.
Absolutely. Are there things you're doing also for remote work to make it successful? Like, are there heuristics, game tools you use, things you think about? What have you thought through to be like, we want to build a successful remote? Is it always going to be remote first, or at least some percentage of the team will be like, what are things you're like, this is what we think we should do based on studying everyone else that's out there for a
Yeah.
successful remote company?
Yeah, so one is we do try to have either a subset of the company meet based on like our pillars like operations, product, etc., marketing, meet in person a couple times a year. That is something that we're trying to kick off and make sure that it actually happens across pillars. So that's been really helpful, especially when new folks join the full-time team, just to have a session when they first join where you meet, say hi, understand body language, seems really
Totally.
basic, but those type of things. So that's important to us. And then we're trying to have a full company offsite hopefully this year. We're a pretty big team now. Last year we did it, the year before we did it. So those type of things are incredibly important. And then encouraging in-person lunches, dinners, hangs, picnics, whatever, whenever there's like a group in New York, for example. So that's pretty great. The in-person stuff, I think that's just important to have in a fully remote team. And then from the remote perspective, what we try to do is just encourage as much as possible, like, the video meetings when we can. Obviously, people just get zoomed out or tired out with video, but as far as, like, leadership, we try to have our cameras on just to encourage, like, "Hey, we're here if you need us. This is my face," whatever. Doesn't have to be it's not mandatory for the company, but just to show that we're present. Small things like that actually really help, and then just talking versus Slack messaging for anything comes to
You have
remote.
a culture, and one thing I know other companies do who are remote first, they also try to have a real culture of kind of capturing all the data, writing things down in a really big way, maybe recording every meeting, which AI now can turn into summary notes, things like that. Do you do those things, or is it more just like, hey, like we just want to let's have a chat, let's call each other as much as possible, and we don't need to record it?
Yeah, we don't record meetings or mandate that everything is notated. I will say that when it's like important strategy sessions or like road mapping or that kind of stuff, where that's definitely documented and you can airdrop in if you're new on the team and see that, highly important. But from like an every meeting perspective, we haven't done that at Function.
How transparent are you guys with the whole team about where the company's going, what's happening, what's good and bad, things like that? How transparent are you with everyone versus leadership team?
Very transparent. I think it's pretty important for folks, for the full-time folks to know what's happening, what's motivating the founders to do X, what's not going so well. We have weekly meetings with the whole company, and then we have weekly meetings with the whole full-time company, and then we have monthly meetings with all of the team, so full-time and contractors. And that's yeah, we're very transparent, not just what's happening at the strategy, like, business direction level, but what's happening pillar by pillar so that folks know what's going on cross-functionally, they can ask questions. Those type of things is pretty important, especially because we are young and small. We're really not that big yet, so it's important for folks to know, like, "Hey, this is what I'm doing on, like, the day-to-day level. How does that impact the bigger picture?" We found that to be incredibly helpful for folks to know versus just being in the dark. Like, if we were all in the same office, it'd be way easier to share those things. So, we have to be more intentional about sharing them more regularly with the whole team.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you put things in place like OKRs, like as you're thinking through, as you're growing, how do you keep people on the same page and focus on like the right metrics? It's very easy for companies and individuals to get distracted. I have a ton of projects and then you just don't do any of them well. What have you put in place to try to keep everyone moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so we have company-wide goals for each quarter and for the year. We also have pillar by pillar goals. Obviously, it's very different for someone like on the operations side where your job as a member success associate is to message with members every single day. That's like turnaround time to getting customer success tickets, right? Versus product team is working towards a sprint. They're actually doing like a building of a feature. Very different, obviously. OKRs, but yeah, every pillar has something that they're working towards, and then they know the broader company-wide objectives and also context of like what's going on this quarter, like what are our goals, how are we going to hit them, if we miss them, why did we miss them, what can we do differently. Those type of things are full-time company-wide conversations that we're having.
What made you decide to be a remote first company? Like why? I mean, sure, you started during COVID, so maybe it's just
Yeah.
an outgrowth of that, but like why else do that given the pros and cons of being remote?
Yes, we started out remote, so it was easier for us to stay remote, I will say, like, if versus if we were pre-COVID. If we had started pre-COVID, I think it would be a little harder. People would be itching to come back and maybe see each other, etcetera. Biggest thing is the access to our incredible team would not have happened if we were in one location. Our team is global. We have a lot of engineers internationally, and they are incredible. We have folks from every corner of the US, and that's been a huge plus for us from a talent generation and a recruiting for the mission perspective. So that's been like our motivating factor to not say, "Hey, we're going to force everyone to come to Austin," for example. There are some pockets of obviously folks that just live in those areas that we're encouraging more in person, but yeah, it's worked really well. I also will say that folks are super productive when they're working from home, and that's been a really positive output of this is like it actually really helps to just stay focused, take breaks, do your thing, and yeah, those are some of the reasons why.
I'm as someone at my company Levy, and my last company before that, all fully remote, and so I'm very biased towards that.
Mhm.
And actually, the job I was doing a while before, even before that, way before remote was even a thing, I was doing remote stuff, and so I'm certainly biased and very much agree with that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people also do like these hybrid, part in office, things like that. What do you find though? How did you guys deal with the fact that there are different pay scales in across the US and different parts of the world? How have you solved that problem?
Yeah. I mean, we have just worked with the different countries and where we're working in and making decisions based on that. It's been pretty straightforward, as in it's been like okay, we're hiring this person, let's say in Argentina versus in California. Obviously, that's a huge pay difference, and it's just worked out for us to have folks across the world that are willing and wanting to work on function such that it hasn't been too much of a issue, I would say.
Do you pay different rates inside of the US? So look, someone who lives in San Francisco or the Bay Area, in New York, and even Austin to some extent is a different than someone who lives in Idaho.
No, we're not doing that location-based difference right now. It's purely based on what you're being hired for.
Going back to sort of like cultural questions to some extent, like when you think through the company you want to build at Function, what does that look like? And who are the folks that you sort of emulate yourself after? When you think through, hey, like, I want to be a COO like this person, or I want to be a founder like this person, in the cultures that they created, like what about those people or the companies they built inspired you to put yourself in the role you're in today and lead towards that excellence you want to get to someday in the future?
Yeah, a couple companies come to mind that I've really appreciated their path. One is ClassPass and one is Airbnb. Two incredible companies. They're obviously massive companies now, but
Well,
I
they
will
weren't
say
always. I mean, they were early,
exactly.
small like everybody else.
Exactly, and they really straight stayed true to a couple core tenets on building their culture really well, focusing on that, and then staying true to the products that they're building. Seems so obvious, but when you're actually doing it, it's can be so challenging. I will say that, it's so easy for us to potentially get pulled in different directions with function. Like, let's try to do this in the future and let's focus all our resources there. The one thing that we've learned, not just from some of the greatest companies, but just working is just ruthless prioritization and making sure that we just kick away everything else that's noise so that the team can stay focused. It's leadership's responsibility to do that, or else they're just going to be like, oh, wait, okay, I guess I'm just going to drive in this direction because you told me to. If we're not doing that, then yeah, it's impossible to keep that track. And I will say those two companies are ones that come to mind of just that they really got that one thing right at the beginning, and now they're able to do whatever they want. And I've just been inspired by those leaders as well.
What are when you like really prioritization is a really good, I totally agree with that being a key thing.
Yeah.
How do you really enforce that? Right. So as COO, what are the things you do to be like, okay, like, hey, this is a distraction. Even tell your co-founders like, hey, this is a
Yeah.
distraction. It's actually wasn't on our roadmap. Let's not do it. How do you go about enforcing that prioritization?
Just what you said. Saying no. Unfortunately, I have to be the no person more than the yes person, because I know that if we don't stay on this one track at this time, my team will get burnt out, the leadership will get burnt out, and at the end of the day, at the end of the sprint, at the end of the month, we're not going to have anything to show for it. So I have to be that person that says, no, we can't do that right now. I love the idea, but let's punt it to 3 months from now when we have the time and space to think about it. Absolutely, like, ideas are amazing, but if we can't execute it, then if we're not executing on what we're trying to get done, then there's no point in just ideating on different ideas. So yeah, I do have to be that no person sometimes to just allow my team to stay focused. Oftentimes I actually block the idea from even getting introduced, like punch it away basically,
Right.
or else it's just wasting everyone's time and it's derailing us from what we're trying to get done that week.
What rises to the level where you might let it distract the team or change focus? So let's say you're halfway through the quarter and you're like, okay, we're moving right along on the goals we set for the quarter.
Yeah.
What would ever rise to the level where you're like, okay, I'm going to introduce this idea and we're going to go in a totally different direction despite it not being part of our plan?
For sure. And that's definitely happened. When me and the founders decide, hey, we actually might want to try this out because maybe it makes our life easier, or we're just going to need to do this manually first so we can hire up to support this side project, for example, try it out. And if we can justify automating or pulling product into it, then we'll do that. That's often what falls onto my plate as the COO is we do everything at Function. We do everything manually first. And then if it's justified, we push it over to the product team. And so I'm the one that, yes, has to say no, but also if it's a really good idea, let's just build up a small team around it
Mhm.
and try to see if we can squeeze this into everything else that's happening. And it's just a matter of, I'll bring my leadership into like my ops leadership into it, not the full team. It's a matter of, hey, yeah, you know what? We actually can spin up a 4-person team on this and tackle it on the side. It won't be distracting. Let's go and try it out for 2 weeks. If it doesn't work, let's table it until 3 months from now. So our team is pretty agile in the way that we operate, that we're able to like spin up a small task force or whatever you want to call it, team against something and keep it quiet, as in it doesn't have to be this whole big announcement
Mhm.
until it's ready to go live. So yeah, those have definitely come in where I have to say yes to some things.
Yeah. Well, of course, like there
Yeah,
are new information means you need to have some level of flexibility.
exactly.
The I love the idea of being kind of manually doing things before you actually go build it. That is
Yeah.
a rule that I learned my very first startup. My co-founder at that was a guy named Walter, an amazing engineer, early at Google, all that other good stuff. And I, of course, had all these ideas. I'm a first time founder. I'm like, let's go do this. Let's
Yeah.
go do this. And he literally would be, Adam, I will go build anything you want with the caveat that you have to do it 10 times manually first
Yeah.
before I will build anything. And so we used to call it Walter's rule of 10. And it's
Mm.
amazing. I mean, that was like 12 years ago or so. And it's still a rule that I apply on a regular basis where I'm like, okay, like I actually had a former colleague I was meeting with last night and she was saying, she's like, why don't you go build this stuff? I'm like, building code. And like, no. We need to do it manually first
Yeah.
before we know it's actually worthwhile because the cost of building something in code and
Yeah.
have it be wrong is very expensive. Whereas you can do things manually with people, sure, it's more expensive in the short term, but like long term, well, sorry, it's actually cheaper in the short term. Long term, you don't want things to be manual if you can help it, but you can spin it up much faster that way. So, long story short, I totally agree with you.
For sure. I will also add that like my co-founder and CTO, Mike, is incredible at ruthless prioritization. And that's the way we've been able to pair on these things is the reason we've been able to grow so quickly at Function, because he I so appreciate the ability for him to say, to your point, once we do something manually 50 times, we can come at it from a product lens and say, you know what? That's great that you have a 20-step process. Software can solve this for the most part in 4. steps. And now we know like what needs to get done. We know all the little nuances. We all know all the edge cases because you've had to do it hundreds of times. So we're actually learning way better and way quicker when doing it manually, which seems like it would be counterintuitive, but it ends up being really helpful.
No, this is something I hope all listeners get from this, which is it's so easy and seductive actually to build in code. You're like, hey, we got all this funding. Let's go
Yeah.
build something in code. It's cleaner. Like, people are messy. I don't want to hire a team, do all these things to actually do stuff manually. But it actually pays off so much more long term if you're
Yeah.
learning to just do it manually a bunch. Because for all the reasons you said, you learn all the edge cases, you know the ways of doing it, you know whether it's even valuable to go build it.
Right.
Because once you build something in code, now you got to maintain it. You've launched it. And like, man, that becomes really expensive really quickly. And most
Mhm.
people don't think about the downstream effects. They're just like, I'm a great engineer. I'm going to go build. And you're
Yeah.
like, do you actually even know your customers want that product?
Right.
And so it's those sorts of questions that make it's love to hear that you guys are asking that. When you think through your culture, again, going back to that, like like walk me through like hours that you expect of people. Like what is this sort of time working, time in not an office, but like sort of time that people are at their desk doing their work, getting things
Mhm.
done. What does that look like, right? Some companies that are like you spoke about, Airbnb and some of these other companies, some of them were really successful because they worked insane amounts. They kind of needed to get there. Other companies, not as much so, but it somewhat depends on the company. What is the sort of mindset that you have for people? It's like, hey, like what is that mindset that you have for people?
Yeah, it's comes in sprints for us. There are some really intense months because we're trying to get something out and everybody knows what we're trying to get out. And it's understood that with a release of a feature, with a push from a marketing perspective, we're expected to see more function members come in through the door. So it comes in waves when it's like, this is going to be a really intense week, a couple weeks, month. And it's communicated that way. Then there's the stuff that are just fires that pop out because we're a startup. And it's kind of like all hands on deck. So what ends up, I think, working out is because it's all hands on deck, like I'm not too good for any role and neither are my co-founders. We're all just going to jump in and help. That has been really helpful, I will say, from the perspective of, oh, it just feels like, my co-founder is like out of the office and I'm having to do all this. Or my boss is out of the office and I'm having to do all this. It's the opposite. It's like all hands on deck. We're all going to figure this out. Let's go. And I will say that, yeah, that comes in waves. The big thing is though, if there's any sense of somebody feeling burnt out or pre-burnout, like we all have check-ins with everybody, we just ensure that there's time scheduled for you to take time off after the sprint
Mm,
and
right.
ensure that you've set up the team so that you can be actually offline. And one example of this that I'm actually happy about is I got married in February and I truly took time off for the first time
Yeah.
and nobody bothered me because and I honestly I think that's all helpful from a leadership perspective. Like, oh, she also took time off too and like
Yep.
truly was offline. Nobody bothered me. Everything was just fine because I had set it up that we were going to be just fine if I was gone. And I encourage that for everybody on my team to do that. So it's like, hey, if you are taking a week off, we're set so that we're not bothering you. And I actually think that was really great as like just doing it by example of truly, yeah, being offline and taking that time off. But people at the company work really, really hard. And I will say that that's just consistent theme across the board is we have a lot of doers and we have a lot of people who are super focused. And so we are just conscious of that as a culture. There's just a lot of work to be done. So encouraging time off after a sprint is something that we've done to ensure people are taking time off.
Speaking of setting sort of an example, what are your sort of standard hours? Like, what does that look like? Do you work, when you start your work, when you
Yeah.
end work, do you work 7 days a week? Do you expect people to jump on a call with you at all random times? Like, what does that look like for you?
No, I don't work 7 days a week. I try not to. I obviously check in on the weekends, but I really try to stay off on Saturdays, like completely off. It's a goal getting there. And then mornings I try to have to myself, whether it's 6:30 or 7, I try to take a walk, don't look at my phone because I'm on the West Coast sometimes and then Central. So I already have messages regardless of
Yeah.
what time I wake up. And so I try to not look at my phone until I take my walk. And yeah, my days have now turned into a lot of just whack-a-mole problem solving. So tons of context switching, as you can imagine. So they don't look the same, obviously, but The goal is to be there for any teammate who needs me for some unblocking, and then for meetings. And I do most of my like focus core work in the afternoons actually, because my mornings are pretty stacked with conversations.
And how do you, it's funny, mine are too. I personally wish I could actually switch it and have my
Me
focus
too.
time be in the mornings.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really, really good about the focus stuff, and meetings are a little bit different, but being in the West Coast, it's a little bit harder to do that. I
Yeah.
find, especially with a global team, I don't know about you guys, but our global team, our meeting times kind of expect everyone to be available between essentially like 9 and about 11:30 a.m. Pacific.
Mhm.
That tends to somewhat work globally. It's not perfect, but it sort of works globally.
Yeah.
Um, which means that's the time we're having meetings. So it just is what it is.
Yeah.
We all make sacrifices. People in other parts of the world have much worse hours in many cases. So I can't really complain.
Sure.
Going back to like building out the team, especially the founder team. I mean, walk me through like, so Dr. Mark Hyman is really well known in the longevity community. He's been out there in a bunch of places, has a great podcast, which I recommend people listen to. How did you guys get someone of sort of that caliber to join and be essentially a co-founder on this journey?
Yeah. So Jonathan and Mark had been in the same networks for many years. And during this whole COVID story that I was mentioning to you, Jonathan happened to go to Hawaii, where him and Mark just were both there in the same group. And Jonathan was sharing this idea, a function of, whole body lab testing and giving access to folks, access to this testing and information to individuals. And Mark was like, wait, hold on. This is what I've been trying to do my whole life, book after book. And he's been across multiple kind of platforms sharing this message for his whole career. But he's one person and he knows that. And if you want to see Mark, it's like a 3-year wait list or something. Don't quote me on that, but it's long. It's going to be hard to see Mark as your doctor. So long story short, he was like, wait, if this message is able to be shared way more efficiently, way more just easily from a money perspective, I want to join this and I'm going to help make this a thing. And it was so easy for him to get on board because this is what he's been doing or trying to do his whole life as a physician. And he, helped us at the very early start of putting together our list of tests that we run for folks. So he was instrumental in that. And then all of the content that we have and we provide to members, we wrote with Mark and alongside other specialists in the field and experts. And yeah, for him, it was just no brainer. And it kind of just worked out really well. And then, yeah, Mark is now a core part of our team. I text with him almost every day. And, he's our chief medical officer. He's also insanely helpful on the marketing side. So, yeah, Mark's instrumental for Function and Function's existence.
Yeah, no, I would imagine. I mean, part of why I asked. I mean, I think a lot of people, founders, would wish to have someone of Mark's sort of stature as part of what they're doing. And I think part of what the story that I imagine for people is like, look, you have to be kind of in the right place to have that conversation. You
Yeah.
have to be in the right networks. You have to be part of that community. You can't just like show up one day, right? If you're just a random entrepreneur, like I want to build a health tech company, and you call up Dr. Hyman, he'd be like, I don't even know who you are. I have no interest.
Yeah.
But Jonathan had been in that for a long time and had been talking to companies in that space and sort of had a real thesis in his own real clout to
Yep.
enable that. So it's sort of this longevity in a space
Yeah.
that enables these sorts of outcomes and getting people who can really take a company to the next level.
Of course. I think this whole journey has led me to understand like that phrase of it's just like right place, right time. Like that happened so many times when it comes to Function. And we're a product of that. It's right place, right time, right conversation.
I kind of believe that the best companies in the world and the most successful, these are the ones we hear about a lot, are riding a wave to some extent and sort of
Mm.
surfing a wave. My impression is that longevity is one of those waves, but how would you sort of define that? Like, what are you seeing in the ecosystem right now? Certainly, I'm sure it's getting more and more competitive too, which has its own set of challenges. Like, what are you seeing as you try to build out Function to become a key player and hopefully a successful quote unquote company in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, longevity is not going anywhere. People are now waking up to the idea that they can actually do something versus, they've seen their parents suffer or they've suffered themselves with like chronic conditions and felt like they couldn't do anything about it but take a medication. And that's just like people are waking up to the idea that that doesn't have to be the case. And it's not just like one type of person that's waking up to that idea. I think obviously post-pandemic focus on health, that shift has obviously been really instrumental in this wave, but it's also the advances in science, it's the advances in access, it's the fact that if we start just with foundational lab testing as one piece, like there's so much more that you can add to that, like the wearables, the Aura Ring, the Apple Watch, that kind of stuff that is just now truly part of people's lives more and more. Obviously, this was pre-COVID too, but there is that like zeitgeist momentum is not going anywhere, I don't think. It's only getting more competitive to your point. Like there's so many more companies that are going to pop up that are doing this, which honestly I welcome. I think it's great. That means more people are interested in it. That means more people are talking about it. Fantastic. The 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 biggest thing that I see is once we start to get to a point where people are actually starting to make changes and see that the changes that they're making are actually being impacted in their health, that's when it's the outcomes that I think are going to be super powerful. And I don't necessarily think we've gotten there at scale, probably in pockets for sure, but those are the stories I'm most excited about hearing when folks are making changes and they're actually preventing the prediabetes that they thought they had or whatever because they knew what to do about it. So that's kind of that's my
Are there big changes in the space? Like speaking a little bit more just about longevity, because once again, sort of a personal interest of mine,
yeah.
right? And I have this luck of being able to talk with you one-on-one here. What are the biggest changes you see coming in the field, right? There's different kind of supplements people are trying, sort of doing just having this information in general. Are there any like big things on the horizon where you're like, yep, this could be something that's really big that might really change what health span means, or just think that like excite you?
Yeah, I actually think it comes back to the basics. There's so many cool things like red light therapy and sauna and cold plunge and all those, and I know that those are probably great. I'm actually trying to focus on the stuff that we put into our mouth and the sun that we see and the community we have, those type of things. I am actually most excited about people realizing how important that is because that's where most of the change can happen. Like you can take a ton of supplements and maybe make a small change, but if you are having a terrible diet and you take a ton of supplements, that's not going to do anything. You're not helping yourself. So it's probably the opposite kind of answer of what you were looking for, but I'm actually most excited about encouraging people to like look at just come back to the basics and look at what they're eating. I think the big debate there is the quality of our food in America and then soil and agriculture. That's a bigger conversation, but that to me is something that I'm excited about being more a part of the narrative, in addition to all the fun, cool gadgets and stuff that people will come up with that are good for you.
Totally. Look,
Yeah.
and your answer doesn't shock me. I obviously would love sort of the fun, sexy, cool, big things coming out. But the truth is, like, I have friends who ask me the same question. I'm like, look, in the end, you need to be making sure you're getting a good amount of like physical activity, you're sleeping well, and you're eating healthy. And if you're doing all of those things, you're already better than a large majority of people out there. And then everything else, like I personally take a bunch of supplements, but I
Yeah.
feel like I've already optimized the other pieces. And so those are just extra things on top to, hey, can I get a little bit extra on top that helps prevent maybe cancer or prevent other different like disease or things like that, or just keeps me in a slightly higher shape level,
Yeah.
which is great. Cause once again, like I want to show up every day feeling energized and in being in a good place. And yes, it starts with all those key things, but the it's always fun to research different things. And, at some point, at least for me, I get tired of like researching cool tech gadgets because for the many I can buy and use at any given time. And so I guess my interest has now moved into the longevity space. But
Yeah, I think the last one I'll add is just surrounding yourself with people that you love and care about and that care about you. I think that's so underrated. The loneliness thing is such a it's a thing. And so talking about that as a pretty important piece of this puzzle that's related to your health is quite important.
it's so true. And actually, these are a good question. So I completely agree with you. Actually, a book that I read a long time ago for one of my last startups was a book called Bowling Alone, and it was basically
Mm.
about, it was sort of the first book on the loneliness pandemic, and the sort of question on that front that I have for you. And as a founder, how do you balance those things? And so what I mean by that is I have this thesis that being good, you can only really be good at one or two things right off the bat.
Hmm.
And you don't really have a lot of time to be good at anything else. So, hey, like I have personally, that means like I have a company that I spend a lot of time on.
Yep.
I have a family that is also incredibly important and I spend a lot of time with.
Mhm.
That doesn't give me actually a lot of time to do working out and staying in shape. I literally, my big working out is like I bike to my meetings and I bike my kids to school. Like that is
Yeah.
my workout most days. I'm kind of doing two things at once. It doesn't give me a lot of time for other hobbies. It doesn't even give me a lot of time for friends.
Hmm.
And that is a dangerous trade-off. But this is about what it means to be an excellent entrepreneur. So
Yeah.
how do you balance those elements with
Such a great point. I'm constantly working on this, and I love talking to other founders about this stuff because you all get it. I have a very similar kind of setup. My focus personally is function, and a huge priority is my relationship with my husband, and then my parents and my sister, my family basically, which leaves me to my health is usually going on walks with people. And I try to get obviously I'm building a health company. I have to stay healthy myself. So I focus on like, cooking my own food and walking and exercising as much as I can. And also that also just helps me stay sane. So yeah, it's definitely a balancing act. But I will say that it's been really helpful to find friends and other founders who understand. And often what we do is we walk together or we work out together. And it's like, cool, we're hanging out and we're doing something for ourselves. And then like on the walk back home, we're talking about our lives. And so kind of establishing that. I will say it's definitely hard to maintain new friendships when it's trying to start a company. It's incredibly challenging. So I try to focus on the ones that I have existing in my life versus net new.
So, Pranitha, tell me a little bit. But one of the questions I like to ask everybody as we're sort of getting to the end of the show, what if the one key piece of advice that you would give every single founder, budding founder, other consultants, let's say, you name it, when it comes to excellence? Like, what is your piece of advice that you would give to folks?
Hmm, that's a good question. There's a couple. I'll go with the one that's coming to my gut. When you're in it, you have a pretty narrow lens of what's going on. So remembering that there is life outside your company and outside your orbit is super helpful. Often the best ideas have come to me when I have taken a step back, talked to someone that has nothing to do with function. The best stories, the best motivations. There's life outside of your company and there's life after your company, even if you have your company for 30 years. That's been the most grounding, that's kept me the most grounded throughout this process.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and people do forget that there's a lot. Frankly, having a more cross-functional perspective on life enables you to be a better founder
Yep.
in a lot of ways. And then how can folks get in touch if they want to learn more about you, what you're up to, what Function's doing? How do they do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I would love to share like a function code for those who are listening. They
There's a
can,
wait list on the website, so
yes, we do have a wait list, but I'd love to provide a skip the waitlist code for those who are listening. And yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me through the function website. I'm also willing to share my contact information for those who are interested, other founders, etc. Always willing to have a chat with other entrepreneurs in the space.
awesome. Well, I definitely fully recommend people do Function. I actually really think that for $500 a year, getting all that information in the recommendations is kind of a steal. So I'm a huge proponent of it. But I also obviously am a believer in just like, I think trying to optimize how you feel every day is maybe the most important thing you can do, because it's really hard to do anything else in your life if you're not feeling good. So you might as well
Good.
try really hard to make sure you're functioning at a high level. So Pranitha, thank you so much for the time. I sincerely appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for being on the show.
Of course. Thank you for the time, Adam. I love the conversation and I'm looking forward to chatting with you some more.